All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where y'all are calling from tonight, in the morning or in the evening, afternoon. To Accented Dialogues in Diaspora, this is our 36th episode, Textures of Narrative, Digital, Political, and Sculptural Explorations. We're going to have the awesome opportunity to speak with journalist, writer Tina Nguyen and digital/sculptural storyteller Tuan Andrew Nguyen in a quick second. I'm going to stop my share screen and just welcome everyone back. For those of y'all who have been to Accented before, or welcome to the folks where this is your first Accented show, to this very casual conversation and community that we have. To introduce myself, I'm the Accented co-host for tonight. My name is Philip Nguyen. I teach ethnic studies, Asian American studies at San Francisco and San Jose State Universities in California. I'm based in the Bay Area. I lead a nonprofit based in San Jose, and I have been a part of DVAN, or the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, which hosts Accented since my time as a graduate student in the Asian American Studies program. Reading the Diacritics blog, attending public events around the Bay Area. And so DVAN really holds a special place for me and for us and for the show Accented. This is our 36th show. We've been we've been doing this for a couple of years now, refining it as we go along with the plenitude of guests that we've been able to have. And that's not without y'all's support, not just for Accented, but for the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. To share a little bit about DVAN, or the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, DVAN believes that the stories and aesthetics of a thriving Vietnamese diaspora can unite our global community. Our mission is to foster diasporic Vietnamese and Southeast Asian literary voices. DVAN promotes nonfiction, fiction, and poetry to empower artists in the diaspora and inspire understanding and dialogue within our community and with others. We champion our complex and diverse stories for future generations, as we are refugees, immigrants, survivors, and their descendants, and know that our stories must be heard. And with that, I'm going to go ahead, for those of y'all who are here with us in the Zoom, to the screen share, and for those of y'all who are watching this later on demand, you can find more and learn more about DVAN by visiting dvan.org. This is what our website looks like. And I also want to make a quick pitch for you all that for us to be able to host programs like Accented, as well as to be able to support our staff members, to empower the stories of the next generation, to support our publication, the Diacritics blog, to host writers, workshops, and residencies, to host public events around the diaspora. One way of doing that is by on DVAN's website by clicking support, and to figure out the ways that you can donate or support us and the work that we're doing. I will also mention that we are currently donations to DVAN are currently being matched, and you can find more information about how you can donate and support DVAN's work by visiting dvan.kindful.com, or by going onto the DVAN website and then clicking support to learn more about ways that you can get involved or ways that you can support our work and make sure that we have what we need to be able to keep the show going and keep the show running. So thank y'all so much for joining us for tonight for Accented. If this is your first time here on in the virtual conversation with us, Accented Dialogues and Diaspora emerged from the pandemic as a way for us to provide an intimate space to facilitate conversation, connection, collaboration between our community members across the Southeast Asian Vietnamese diaspora. We've been able to bring together so many cultural producers to talk about their work, their stories, their passions, their inspirations, to drink and talk shit sometimes, as well as to share what they've been working on. And so now in our 36th show, we've been able to keep it going and hope to still keep it going with the support of so many of y'all. At the end of the show, there will also be a survey that will ask you to fill out about your experience during your time here on Accented. That'll really help us get more support so that we can continue hosting the show for episodes with more guests to come. I'm also, at this point in time, I'd like to also just direct you to the DVAN Instagram, which our staff behind the scenes who will be helping us throughout the show, who are dropping notes in the chat. you can visit instagram.com/weare_DVAN and make sure you click that bell for the notification so you know exactly when the next Accented show is going to happen to join us, to share a drink with us, and to listen to so many of our inspired guests. And now I have the distinct honor of introducing y'all to the hosts of Accented, Viet Nguyen, whose novel The Sympathizer won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and numerous other awards. His most recent publication, A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, a history, a memorial, is A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, a history, a memorial. His other books are the sequel to The Sympathizer, The Committed, a short story collection, The Refugees, and Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, as well as Race and Resistance, Literature and Politics in Asian America. He has also published Chicken of the Sea, a children's book written in collaboration with his son, Allison. He's a university professor at the University of Southern California, a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim and MacArthur Foundations. He's also the editor of The Displaced, Refugee Writers on Refugee Lives, and the forthcoming children's book, Simone, illustrated by Minnie Fan. He also has an HBO television series for The Sympathizer coming out soon on April 14th. Please give it up for Viet Nguyen.
Hey, Philip. Thanks so much for that introduction. Hi, everybody out there. Such a delight to be here with you on Textures of Narrative with two very distinct guests, but who have something in common, as we're going to discover. Our first guest is Tina Nguyen. She is a national correspondent and the founding partner for Puck, covering the world of Donald Trump and the American right. Previously, Tina Nguyen was a White House reporter for Politico, a staff reporter for Vanity Fair Hive, and an editor at Mediaite. Tina graduated from Claremont McKenna College and lives in Washington, D.C., and she is the author of the just published The MAGA Diaries, My Surreal Adventures Inside the Right Wing and How I Got Out. It's available now from Simon & Schuster. Hi, Tina. Muted.
Yeah, there we go. Hi, Viet. Thank you for that introduction. And thanks for having me here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. And also awesome because we're going to be in conversation with our next guest, Tuan Andrew Nguyen. He's an artist whose work explores the power of storytelling through video and sculpture. He holds a BFA from the University of California at Irvine and an MFA from the California Institute of the Arts. Tuan is a founding member of the Propeller Group, an entity that positions itself between a fake advertising company and an art collective. His work has been included in a lot of different international sites, notably the Berlin, just this year, the Berlin Biennale, the Aichi Triennale in Japan, the Biennale de Dakar in Senegal. His work is included in permanent collections all over the world, but just the ones in the United States are the SF MoMA in San Francisco, the MoMA of New York, Guggenheim Museum in New York, and the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. He's joining us from Cape Town, South Africa. Hi, Tuan.
Hi, Viet. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here.
We're especially grateful to you. I think it's supposed to be 4 a.m. in Cape Town, which could be your bedtime for all I know. But anyway, thanks for being here. We have this topic lined up. And again, it seems like you're two very different kinds of people, obviously. Tina's a political reporter, a journalist. One is a visual artist. But when I look at your work, I see that there is a continuity, both in terms of your history as children of the Vietnamese diaspora, whose existence wouldn't even be possible without war and politics and all the things we've discussed many times on this show, but also because Tina's work very clearly concerned with American politics, but looking at Tuan's work, also, I think, in many ways concerned with how politics has transformed people's lives and the landscapes of countries and cultures, and your work really grapples with that in addition to many other things. So let's start off by asking the both of you, just tell us a little bit about your background and how it is that took you to where you are now. Starting with you, Tina, I think there's a little bit of a biographical trajectory between your own background and how you ended up writing a book like The MAGA Diaries.
It's a really, every time that someone has asked me about the beat that I cover, it's two parts. The first part is, wait, so how is it that you write about the American right and politics and MAGA people without going insane? And I say, well, it's because when I was younger, I was actually part of the conservative activist world. And part two, they look at me and they see like an Asian American woman whose parents are refugees, and they're like, hey, I'm sorry, you? Why? What the hell? And after I got that question over and over and over again in my writing career, I was thinking, wait a second, why did I make these decisions? And when I started writing this book, I was trying to take apart why I was a person who fell into a world where people were conservative, people wanted to be professionally conservative for a living, why it was that I knew people like Tucker Carlson and Andrew Breitbart up close, and why that was just not something that happened elsewhere. And so excavating my own history, going through an educational experience that led to right-wing politics, and discovering exactly how much of a pipeline and professionalized becoming a Republican in America is, really helps me understand a greater part of American politics that seems to make absolutely no sense when you see it come out of nowhere with Donald Trump. But if you go back like 60, 70 years, the structure is all back there. And they were also good at capturing me because I was a young woman looking for opportunity, and they just happened to say the right thing to me at the right time. And we can definitely go into why a Republican message resonated with a young minority woman. But I think if this is an audience full of Vietnamese people who've lived in America, this audience might get it.
Well, I think it's not surprising that there are Vietnamese Americans in right-wing politics and involved with Make America Great Again and so on. What's unusual is a member of the elite mainstream media being involved with that, because usually when we talk about Vietnamese Americans, the ones who are right-wing and conservative tend to be in the Vietnamese language press, deeply embedded in the Vietnamese language community. So I think part of what makes you stand out is that your trajectory took you away from that, and yet you still ended up, for at least for a while, in this right-wing world. I'm surprised there's not more of you, or of the previous version of you, out there in the mainstream media.
I mean, there is. The most powerful executive right now at Fox is a guy named Viet Dinh, who was a Vietnamese boat child, went to Harvard, is now general counsel at Fox News, and I would say is the hatchet man for everything that the Murdochs ever did. But I don't know too much about his background, but I can speak pretty distinctly about that, what drew me to the movement in the first place. I was a college student at Claremont McKenna College, which has, among other things, really deep connections to the Reagan Revolution, Barry Goldwater, National Review, that era of American politics, and was very insistent on trying to find people who were interested in American politics, but specifically the idea of individual freedom and liberty and all of those good buzzwords. And the moment that they found someone who was kind of inclined to it, they just start leaping on you with these promises of internships and, oh my God, you're so promising. Oh my God, would you like this research position here? Would you like to come to this meeting where you're gonna enter this back room with, I don't know, like 90 appellate judges who are in high positions, and they're all interested in maybe seeing you have a career. Like, there is an entire world that you gain access to if you kind of believe the same things and are promising enough to have a career, that, like, it wasn't so much for me that I had right-wing beliefs to begin with. It was more, I was really into the American Revolution as a child, and then a whole bunch of people saw me and started throwing paid internships in my face. And here's the thing about the right wing that no one quite understands, is that, like, the moment they find someone who is promising enough, they will go to the freaking moon for you, and you will have people talking to you that you never thought would give you the time of day. Like, I was at some internship working for this Republican lobbyist, and I mentioned I was doing a thesis on Asian American voting patterns, and she just went, "Oh, do you want to talk to Elaine Chao?" And I'm like, I could talk to a former cabinet secretary as a 22-year-old? That's amazing.
So you were being groomed from the very beginning. Right. Yes. Well, the lesson I take from this is if I was willing to convert to the right wing, I get my own talk show. Wow.
You
That's
you could be there.
Yeah, you would seriously make a lot of money because a whole bunch of right-wing donors would throw money at you and be like, oh my God, you have this amazing conversion story to tell the people. And you just have to like put on some more makeup and wear
some more makeup
and a suit, and then I could have dinner with Elon Musk. Okay, I got it. Now I have an alternative career path laid out. Now, Tuan, okay, you grew up in Oklahoma and Texas, and you did the thing that obviously you're not supposed to do. You got tattoos, you became an artist, and all of this. What was the trajectory like? You know, how does one come out of Oklahoma and Texas from Vietnamese American background and then become the kind of artist that you did? And we'll get into the nature of the art very soon as well.
You know, I don't have a good response to that question. Actually, I grew up in Oklahoma. We landed in Oklahoma. My parents had a lot of trouble finding work. So we ended up traveling from Oklahoma to Texas, and then eventually from Texas to California. And we ended up in California just months before the LA riots happened. My father had found an apartment in Long Beach, California. And then, you know, when the riots happened, or shortly before, I can't remember, it's all kind of blurry, but we ended up moving into a one-bedroom apartment with my aunts and my grandparents down in Orange County. That was my trajectory. And, you know, I got my MFA at Cal Arts in 2004, and I decided to get out of the US, and I've been in Saigon for 20 years now. That's my kind of
You're being so modest and so not forthcoming because I know there is more going on. Because number one, you were in Orange County, you went to school at UC Irvine. I've been to both places. You know, Irvine is not exactly, I would say, a hotbed of leftist, progressive, radical activism in the avant-garde. I mean, there's pockets of it, obviously, on a college campus, but you had to come out of an Orange County background, go to Irvine, where a lot of the Asian Americans and Vietnamese Americans are you know, focused on tech and medicine and science and things like that. But what was the impetus? What you majored in art actually when you were at Irvine, so you'd already made some kind of intuitive or deliberate decision to do that. What drew you?
You know, I actually got into Irvine with the intention of going pre-med. I was really good in biology, and I wanted to become a doctor. But you know, along with going into the biology program, I got a work study position at the medical school there, working in medical admissions. And I saw some of the craziest shit, like people threatening to blow up the medical school for not getting into medical school, and some crazy stuff. But you know, they also, one interesting thing is that the medical school's admissions committee recommended that I take extracurricular activities, or you know, get a double major to kind of increase my chances of getting into medical school. And I had grown up, you know, my mom aspired to be an architect. She took drafting. She never could get into architecture because her grasp of English wasn't good enough. But I grew up with, you know, looking at her drawing and doing these like technical drawings all the time, and was just amazed by it. And I ended up drawing myself, and was quite intrigued with art. And then I became intrigued with filmmaking. So I took it. I double majored in art just as a kind of way to booster my application, to kind of beef it up a little bit. And it turned out, like, you know, I met some really politically engaged artists like Daniel Martinez, or, you know, Connie Samaras, Catherine Opie. And the deeper I got into that art world, the more I felt like there was a kind of agency there that was very relevant to me. And the deeper I got into organic chemistry, I mean, that shit became more and more abstract. So that was my turning point. So I ended up dropping my my dreams of becoming a doctor and following my art career. And in the art, I think there's other ways of thinking about healing people, healing myself, healing us.
I guess for Tina, I mean, do you have did you know that you wanted to become a journalist? I know you mentioned that you're really interested in history. I know you had this fascination with the founding fathers. Like, was where you ended up now like aligned with what maybe your parents, the expectations that they had for you?
I don't really know what my parents expected of me. They just kind of went, okay, what are your best grades in? Just kind of go in that direction. And I discovered maybe senior year that I loved writing nonfiction. So at a certain point, I was like, okay, I'm good at writing nonfiction. I like following politics and history. What if I just covered politics for a living? And that's why I went to Claremont McKenna. But it's kind of funny that the reason I went into the type of journalism I do now, which is not necessarily straight reporting, but more punchy magazine type writing, is literally because I interviewed for a job with Tucker Carlson and learned that a job like his existed. Back in 2011, part of the conservative job network that I was involved in put me in the Daily Caller, and I interviewed with Tucker. And when I was researching him in advance, I discovered that he had been a magazine journalist, like back when he was far more sane than he is now. His entire job was literally get paid a lot of money to go have a crazy adventure with someone in the middle of the African rainforest with Reverend Al Sharpton or whatever, and just explore and listen to people and draw a story from them. And I was 22. It was 2011. I thought that was the coolest shit ever. So part of the reason I went to the Daily Caller was, and this was a much more innocent time in journalism, was maybe there is a possibility I could end up having a job like his. Now I don't want that, but the general idea that someone was able to do a thing that I thought was impossible and maybe there was a path to get there kind of set me on the trajectory to go to magazines.
I see. Oh my goodness. Yeah, what a trajectory.
Okay, Tina, I'm gonna ask the question that I think we're all dying to ask, since you've written a book called The MAGA Diaries, which is there going to be a MAGA Diaries 2? Is there going to be a sequel come 2020, late 2024, early 2025? Your prediction based on your political expertise.
Oh boy. I would like to not write that sequel, but I imagine that if there's a MAGA Diaries 2, it's either going to be in one of two directions. Either it is MAGA takes over the federal government and the people who I grew up with studying politics and understanding their really particular interpretation of laws and natural rights and what being an American is or is not gets a chance to enact that into law. And it's going to be a really difficult, complex, but necessary chronicling of bureaucracy and decline. If Biden wins, MAGA Diaries is going to look angry, and I'll put it this way. I don't imagine there's a situation where Trump will ever acknowledge that he loses an election. In the book, I actually go into my experience covering January 6th on the ground, and my connection to what happens in the MAGA movement is pretty good, to the point that I actually was able to predict that there would be some amount of violence on Capitol Hill. And I had pitched a story where I went to the Hill to interview people who were specifically there to harass lawmakers into stopping Biden from being president. And I met Proud Boys there who were like, ooh, we've got a plan that's happening for today. I met these preachers who were going, we should storm the Capitol. And I'm like, wow, sir, it's 10 a.m. You know you can't do that, right? He's like, I don't care. This is our God-given right. So if Biden wins, Trump is not going to change his mind unless there's a massive amount of money for him to do so. I don't know what that looks like. That's kind of a theory I've got. But the anger that he bred into his followers and Republicans in general is going to remain. And what that anger does, I would probably say it moves them further away from the federal government. And I don't know what that's going to look like. And I hope it's not violent.
Wow. If even with the current administration, with Joe Biden, I'm tempted to leave the country. With a Trump administration number two, I'm almost guaranteed to leave the country. So I'm curious, like it's taken me 40 plus years as an American citizen to get to this point of exhaustion with American empire and the United States. When you left, like you said, 20 years ago, I don't know what your motivations were, if it was related to domestic American politics or if it was a draw from Vietnam pulling you there. But talk about that. Like, what was it like to leave this country, the United States, and commit to Vietnam, a country that your parents fled from?
Yeah, it was a quite interesting moment in my life. I had been visiting Vietnam a couple years before that during my undergrad, and there are several reasons that kind of motivated me to leave the country. The U.S. politics at that time was something I wasn't agreeing with, but a stronger force was wanting to be with my grandmother. I grew up listening to these stories, these wonderful stories about her. She's a writer, she's a poet. She started publishing her poetry at a very young age, when she was 16 in Hanoi. And for a woman at that time, I was imagining that'd be very difficult to do. She's written books, books she's written plays, and she's published her poetry and books. And she was working in a very kind of political newspaper that was kind of critical of both sides of the war. And I just heard these amazing stories with her of her, and I wanted to kind of be there in her presence and in proximity with her and to learn from her. So she was one of the main kind of reasons why I left the US for Vietnam. And I was actually hoping to make a documentary to film her and to interview her and to end up with a documentary with her of her. I ended up shooting a lot of video cassettes. Back in the days, we were using hi8. But I haven't edited anything because I think I was just so enamored by her. My grandmother just passed. This weekend will be her 2-year anniversary, death anniversary. She died of COVID at 102 years old. But yeah, she was my main motivation for moving to Vietnam. It's interesting though, because I was there with her for a very long time, and I have many aunts, and a lot of them are in Texas, and so they decided to kind of move her from Vietnam to Texas after about 7 or 8 years of me being with her, thinking that she was getting older. I wouldn't be able to take care of her in her old age. So we kind of did this thing where I ended up staying in Vietnam and she ended up moving to Texas, which was quite funny, actually.
Well, that's beautiful. And then also now I can't wait to see what you conjure up out of all the footage. But I want to make sure that we see some of Tuan's work, so we get a sense of you as an artist, and because we're talking the abstract so much. I think Philip has a clip queued up right now. Tuan, do you want to give us a preface here about what we're going to see?
Yeah, so this is going to be a clip from in the art world we call it a single channel work. I work in multiple channels. So a multiple channel work would be many screens or many projections that are running at the same time. This is a single channel work. Essentially, it's a film. It's a 60-minute film that I made in collaboration with the community in Guangxi. Very interested in the topic of UXO, unexploded ordnance, and Guangxi, because it sits right below the DMZ in the central part of Vietnam. It was heavily bombed, and what are the statistics? 15 million tons of ordnance was used during the Vietnam War. It's like 3 times that of World War I and World War II combined. But unfortunately, 1 out of every 3 ordnance did not explode when it was supposed to. So it's still sitting there in the land, kind of right below the surface. So I was looking at UXO as a kind of way to think about memory, and a way to think about trauma. So this film, it's called The Unburied Sounds of a Troubled Horizon. It's a fictional film, but it interweaves many of the stories that I kind of gathered during my research. And I made this film during the pandemic because I wasn't able to travel, but I was able to travel inside the country. And it helped me to kind of return to my interests of, me and the Propeller Group were doing a lot of research regarding the weapons that came out of the Vietnam War. We did projects that looked at the AK-47 and the M16. We've shot AK-47s and M16s into each other, into ballistic steel blocks, and made sculptures out of that process. So this was a moment for me to kind of rethink, the remnants and the relics of war that were still affecting people in present day. Just a really quick, interesting fact before we play the video. More civilians, farmers, and a lot of children have been affected and have lost their lives due to UXO during peacetime than the number of active duty U.S. military that died during the Vietnam War. So there's a really deep kind of irony there that I was exploring. We follow a protagonist named Viet, who's from Guangxi, and she is having a dinner conversation with her mother, who she takes care of. She runs a scrapyard. She makes a living collecting, UXO bomb metal, and her mom thinks she's kind of possessed because she takes the same material that killed her father and brother, and she makes sculpture out of them, and they're kinetic, strange kind of sculptures. And her mom thinks she's demonic, she's possessed. So Nguyen has gone on a journey talking to different mediums, monks, and so on and so forth to figure out what's wrong with her. And in the scene, she reveals what's wrong with her.
Here's a clip from The Unburied Sounds of a Troubled Horizon by Tuan Andrew.
Rằng một ông Tây nổi tiếng lại muốn ông là một nghệ sĩ. Một nghệ sĩ người Tây nổi tiếng chuyển kiếp thành một đứa nhặt phế liệu nghèo khổ ở Việt Nam. Lại còn là đàn bà. Kiếp trước chắc ác lắm. Mà đầu óc mi hoang tưởng quá.
Mẹ nói con bị ám. Con nghe lời mẹ đi hỏi đủ người. Hóa ra con không phải bị ám, mà con là hậu kiếp của Alexander Kander. Ông có chết đúng 49 ngày thì con được sinh ra. Mà hồi nhỏ mẹ hay nói con hay ngủ mơ, nói tiếng Tây tiếng Ú chứ má.
Còn nít ai biết hắn bô lô ba lá cái chi?
Con đã nhớ lại dịch vài chữ trong tờ tạp chí Ni. Lúc con sống, ông nghệ sĩ Ni từng làm những tác phẩm để phản đối chiến tranh Việt Nam. Con thấy mấy tác phẩm của ông giống như bom với máy bay. Giống như một trận bom đúng không? Hệt như trận bom mà ngày xưa mẹ hay kể cho con nghe.
Thôi đừng nói nữa. Ăn đi.
Có thể ông. Có thể con đến đây vì con biết mình cần phải làm thêm một cái gì đó. Có khi mấy tác phẩm làm ở đây là có một kiếp sống khác. Rồi đó. Cho nên là con
không cần phải trở thành nghệ sĩ người Tây. để chứng minh mình là một người quan trọng. Mẹ không cần Mỹ thành ông nọ bà kia. Mỹ đã có khi mô là một đứa con đàng hoàng chưa đã?
Cái chi? Mẹ nói cái chi đó? Răng lúc bố mẹ cũng.
Rồi chứ Mỹ thành một nghệ sĩ nổi tiếng, Mỹ muốn bỏ mẹ đi lúc mô cũng được à?
Thôi dẹp đi. Chứ con quan trọng chứ cả. Cán đỡ hay cán chí á thì cũng chẳng con quan trọng. Chứ con là con. Và con muốn đi vì mẹ làm con thì khó ở á.
I'm gonna stop it right there. I feel like we could keep going. I'm very curious as to see what this tension at the dinner table between like mother and daughter feel like. I think there's something special about like the regionality of the dialect too, Tuan.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could kind of speak to that. I mean, like, how, I'm also just like wondering like where's your inspiration come from to pick a scene like this? And I mean it almost feels like in a way they're also talking about like trauma and mental health, right? How do you get into a space where you're able to not only like think about that in like a diasporic Vietnamese context, but also translate it into your art?
Yeah, no. So the mother is definitely suffering from PTSD. We often think about, you know, the soldiers and the veterans who come home from war, you know, plagued with trauma, but we often forget the children and the wives and everybody else who goes through war. We also experience PTSD and the traumas of war. You know, and it's interesting because the word trauma in Vietnam is not something that is very popular, you know, and this idea of dealing with trauma is a very new and novel idea in Vietnam. Yeah, so our protagonist in the film, she has to deal with that. She has to deal with her own traumas, but she has to kind of work through her mother's trauma. And it's an intergenerational one.
Mm.
It's an intergenerational trauma that she's trying to navigate and figure out how to heal. Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting process to work with the community there. And it's very specific. So a lot of people, even when I show this film in Vietnam, they have a hard time understanding the dialect because it's very specific to Quang Tri. And it was very intentional to work with people in the community and actors in the community to express that dialogue in a specific and accurate way.
It reminds me of me going back to my parents' quê, which is about 20 minutes from Ho Chi Minh's birthplace. No one told me in advance that they speak a dialect of Vietnamese there that no one else understands. So I went up there. I had studied Vietnamese in Saigon for 4 months. Was all ready to go. I went there and I couldn't understand a word that people were saying to me in my own parents' my uncle's household. You know. Now I see between Tuan's work and Tina's, and I'm going to explain. Okay, you know, Tuan's work. This particular film is set in Quang Tri, which I've visited and I've seen. You know, demining crews working under the hot sun, probing square meter by square meter to try to unbury the unexploded ordnance that's threatening people's lives, these farmers who are just trying to make a living and they get blown up at any moment, right? And so there's a metaphor there, obviously, about the past that's not yet past, that's still there underneath the landscape, that people, if they don't want to deal with it, they're going to step on a mine and get blown up, okay? Now, in Tina's work, you know, with MAGA Diaries, with everything we've been discussing in terms of the politics of the United States, there's a similar sense for me because Quang Tri is below the DMZ, as Tuan said, you know, we're a divided country. We have a demilitarized zone. We have, you know, a fundamental division in this country that to me goes way back to the very origins of the United States. From my perspective, in colonialism and genocide and enslavement. But from the MAGA perspective is a fault line built upon something else, which from my perspective is a fault line built upon the liberal left betrayal of the United States. And Tuan's work is partly about the necessity to remember things that people would rather forget. And I can never forget that when Donald Trump gave his inauguration speech, he said, "You will never be forgotten again." I was not a part of the you. It was a different part of the country that was a part of the you. So the questions of memory and division and so on, that Tuan's work is concerned with, I think, are completely present in the United States, although it's done in a very different ethnocentric fashion from the American perspective. So that's the long windup for me to get to Tina's work. And to tell us a little bit about MAGA Diaries and your diagnosis of how deep these divisions are, maybe especially from the right-wing perspective.
Yeah, one of the things I've come to realize throughout my entire career is that I am a person that should not have been in the rooms that I was being invited into, but I was there anyways for one reason or another. And I'm not just talking about right-wing rooms either. Like, a huge part of the book takes place while I'm a tiny little staff writer at Vanity Fair. And the fact that I was able to get through the doors in the first place was a twist of luck. The fact that I was someone who didn't have the right credentials or the right amount of money and just did not fit in class-wise made me this total outlier. Really enough, the fact that I had this fluency in right-wing stuff that I literally tried to bury when I walked through the doors for the first time, I left it off my resume, suddenly became this massive asset. And I found myself trying to translate a completely different foreign, not just language, but understanding of what is fundamentally American to a group of people who were rich, supposedly worldly, supposedly elite and educated, who were just still there going like, wait, no, this stuff, like, Steve Bannon's not important. Why do you care about him? And I'm just here going like, no, there's a massive world of people who are waiting in the wings to just like, fuck your shit up. And it took so much time for it to come to bear. But like, if you knew enough of it in the background, and if you were literally like indoctrinated and read up on all of this history, all of these like specific understandings of what the founding fathers were writing and how they understood natural law and how like the Athenian way of understanding the political governance is so antithetical to what the liberals are doing, and wasn't ancient Greece great, and what's happening in California with communism is horrible. I felt like I just started becoming this bridge between two people who, one party had a lot of resentment towards the left and studied them and opposed them and came up with their own theories and strategies and built their own almost parallel government structures and political activist networks. And literally, in my case, they built their own alternative media infrastructure. And then when you go into the mainstream world, which I'm sorry to say is its own world, it is so narrow and looks inward so much and does not acknowledge that anything could possibly live outside of it. And that is due to a number of factors, including the like wealth disparity, the shutdown of local newspapers, disintegrating social bonds, etc. And just looks outside itself and goes, wait, this couldn't possibly happen. That's not reasonable. So yeah, the MAGA Diaries was not just born out of people asking me, how is it that you became who you are? But it was like, how did everything become what it was? And how did my existence just kind of moving here, there, up, down, like whatever, help me understand any of this and cover it and literally predict things?
I'm curious about, within the United States, we're living in a moment of intense conflict of various kinds. MAGA is now compounded by Israel, Palestine, Gaza. All kinds of allegations of silencing and censorship, blah, 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 are being thrown from every different perspective and so on. I have very strong opinions about this. But to turn it back towards Tuan, I'm curious, as we talk about how the United States has had intense difficulties confronting its very divisive past and being able to talk about it. You are in Vietnam also talking about a very problematic past as well. Do you find challenges dealing with this work? I mean, you mentioned the fact that people don't want to talk about trauma or have not talked about trauma, which is one thing, but your work is intensely political, and it's hard to be an artist in Vietnam working on political matters. You don't have to get specific if it's problematic, but I'm just wondering about the general terrain of dealing with
Yeah.
a past in a country that, from my point of view, has had some challenges dealing with the past.
Yeah, that's a great question, Viet. And depending on who's in the audience, I can answer in different ways. You know, I I have to be careful about how I approach this question, actually. It's difficult to, you know, to be an artist in Vietnam. One other reason that drew me to working in that space, because it's a very complicated political landscape, you know, like charged with a lot of history and a lot of trauma. But it's a very, very difficult space to be an artist in. So just a few weeks ago, I was in conversation with Pamela Corey, who's a dear friend of mine, an academic. She's teaching at Fulbright University in Saigon. We were talking about, you know, maybe doing a screening of this film, The Unburied Sounds of a Troubled Horizon. And eventually, like many other projects that, you know, I've wanted to show to a Vietnamese audience, never came to fruition for multiple reasons. You know, we mentioned Din Q Lee, a mutual friend of ours. So Din and I, Tiffany Chung, another artist, and Hatu Phum Nam, we started a nonprofit artist-run organization called San Art in 2007. And, you know, it was a organization that was watched, and it was, you know, we ran into a lot of problems with censorship and what we were able to talk about and not talk about. So, you know, I guess in short, it's a very complicated landscape, political landscape to navigate, which is quite unfortunate, because there's so many young, talented, creative artists in Vietnam that need to be shown, you know, that need to have a space to kind of be encouraged and supported.
I feel your pain, because the Sympathizer TV series is coming out and it won't be shown in Vietnam.
Of course not.
Not
Of course
surprising.
not. I mean, Barbie wasn't even shown in
Right.
Vietnam.
All right, Philip, you have a question for our guests, and then I think after that we're going to go to the Q&A from the audience. So if you in the audience have not yet put a question in the Q&A function, please do so now. We'll be calling on you.
Yeah, I think my questions have to do with, you know, relationship to Vietnamese American community specifically. I think for Tuan, I want to know, like, I know you have some installations or work showing stateside, like what has that relationship or that response from Vietnamese American community members been to your work, especially like that you're based in Saigon in Vietnam, even though you're building out this like this space, this community space that is like resisting like things like political censorship, right? And then I think in a similar vein, for Tina, if you can help make it make sense, like giving your own political insights, like why was it that we saw things like the flag of the Republic of Vietnam at the Capitol, what your relationship was to that, and you know, if you can maybe speak to your own like interpersonal cultural experience.
You want me to take that first, Tuan, or do you
Go for it, Tina.
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Question that's on my mind
yeah,
too.
totally. Yeah. I remember watching this snowballing meme happening on the right in Asian language media that was just like, Joe Biden is bad, he's controlled by China. Joe Biden is bad, he's controlled by China. And it was all in like Chinese and Vietnamese language media. And like Vietnamese people were already pretty Republican to begin with, but it seemed that Trump was able to tap something in them that was deeply like, oh no, we remember what communism was. We remember the fall of Saigon and our lives being destroyed in an instant. Trump might be, boorish and terrible, but Joe Biden is becoming the avatar of everything we are terrified of. So there are certainly people who vote for Donald Trump. I have never seen anyone as like obsessed with Donald Trump as old Vietnamese Americans are. And,
Word.
And so going back to the Capitol, I just remember seeing all of these old Chinese and like Vietnamese grannies holding signs with Joe Biden and devil horns. And then when I started seeing the flag, I just went, oh no, this makes sense. Like, it was a symbol of their resistance to what they thought was going to happen. And part of me was like, no, this is not what's going to happen. Why are you like, you're connecting this to a really deep-seated trauma that someone has like force-fed you. And I think that like when people talk about disinformation and misinformation and how trust in the media is declining, they very rarely talk about non-English language media. Vietnamese disinfo is a giant channel of information. And I think, I don't know, I know a bunch of people who monitor this space and they don't have resources or manpower or maybe perhaps not even interest in focusing on Asian American stuff. And I'm like, why? This is huge. You have to understand how potent this is for immigrants. And then they come back to me and go like, oh my God, how is it that immigrants don't understand that voting for Donald Trump is bad? And I'm just like, I have been trying to tell you. Like, people are literally waving their flag in your face about it. And half of it was seeing the flag on January 6th. Half of it was, I get it, this is you having a trauma reaction. And the other half was, are people going to understand this? Outside
Tina,
of this room.
from my conversation with people in the Vietnamese American community, older, people from the older generation, like my mother, who listens to these, media channels that you spoke about, and there's limited channels, right? There's limited options for older Vietnamese, the older Vietnamese generation who do not have a good grasp of English. Like my mother, she won't watch, anything else like BBC or
Is she
whatever.
on the same YouTube channels as my parents are probably on,
Probably. I think that's one issue that we have to deal with, the lack of alternatives for an older generation to get access to. The other thing that I've kind of learned is that because Trump was so outrightly and directly anti-Chinese, that was a hook for a lot of the older generation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
But
the
it was a very
Democrats have
simple kind of thing. You're like, oh, he's anti-Chinese and the Chinese are trying to, take over Vietnam. So
well, I mean, talk about the past not being past. That was a long time ago, right? And in some sense, like that was 1,000 years of Chinese colonization, but that Chinese colonization was about almost 1,000 years ago. But of course, there's more recent interactions with Vietnam and China as well. But yeah, history keeps returning in all different ways, both for the United States and Vietnam. And then the Vietnamese diaspora is caught at the intersection of that, unfortunately, in this particular political epic that the MAGA Diaries is dealing with. Okay, we're going to switch to Q&A. And in fact, there is a question in the Q&A from Aaron Louie. Tina, can you talk about the how I got out part of the MAGA Diaries story?
Oh, yeah. Remember when I was talking about that right-wing job network and career path that was supposed to take young people and turn them into like Mitch McConnell, which is exactly how Mitch McConnell became powerful. He was recruited as a teenager. I started asking questions, which you're not supposed to do. My first job, I started asking, wait, why is it my editor, a person who doesn't work at the Daily Caller and has a comms company? The moment I brought that up, I suddenly was let go for financial reasons. Then I started going back to my mentor, who was literally appointed my mentor by a libertarian journalism program that was funded by the Koch brothers. And he started placing me in these jobs that were supposed to give me experience in journalism. But the more I started poking at it, the more I was like, no, you're actually asking me to go and like massage the truth and present it in a way that's supposed to make Democrats look bad. And the more I started pushing back on it, the more the response I got was, well, the thing is that like the Democrats, no one's asking the Democrats these questions. If you were the Washington Post, you wouldn't be asking the Democrats these questions. And I started realizing that the world that had been constructed for me was full of people with interests, political interests, monetary interests, who wanted to like use journalism as a shield and a, you know, puppet theater for them to put a narrative forth that was going to help them out in the long run. Like I remember literally interviewing for a job where they asked me to quote unquote muckrake for dirt on teachers unions in Madison, Wisconsin, during the time that they were having this big fight with Governor Scott Walker. And at that point, I was just like, you know what? I'm young. I don't have any college debt. Fuck this shit. I'm moving to New York. I'm going to forget this ever happened. And I literally became a food writer for like 2 years. But the entire point of moving to New York was to pretend that never happened. And I thought it was just going to, you know, die there. But unfortunately, day 2 of my second day at Vanity Fair, where I thought like, okay, I've done it. I've made it. Donald Trump announces he's running for office. So I got out, I got dragged back in because that's how history worked. And I didn't quite anticipate it, but well, here we are.
Another question for Tina, just back to back, since you're on it from T Bui. She asked, does it feel like the US is on the brink of causing some horrible trauma that we'll need to heal from at some point in the future?
Oh my God. How do you not know we're not experiencing that horrible trauma? If you don't mind, I would like to take that to, I would say, a fairly dramatic breaking point, because I think if you're asking that question, it does imply, is there going to be an irreparable split in the social fabric that we can't undo? It is quite possible that we won't. I think that if the MAGA movement, as I cover it, does not remain cohesive and coherent, things might stabilize. I do, however, have this theory that I'm working on as like a bigger concept called the infinite fringe. And it's basically this idea of why it is that the social fabric is becoming like so ripped apart. And it's because I don't think there are gatekeepers to decide, all right, this is conversation that is acceptable versus unacceptable. And that happened within the right wing too. That was why you didn't see conservatives go off in weird populist directions for decades and decades and decades. They were really good at being like, all right, we want to have free market economics and no racists that are like wearing white hoods or whatever. And they no longer have that ability because the internet has allowed the people that they've tried to exile to have their own communities and possibly build them even larger ones. And they gain influence, and people in those communities who get kicked out can go elsewhere and build and gain more influence. And the thing driving the MAGA movement is obviously like a very deep-seated anger and hatred and conspiracy-mindedness that's always existed in American politics, like even back to the very beginning of the country. But there is a stronger ability for it to gain power and momentum that the internet is able to like speed up. So the momentum that exists on the right, if it keeps building and if it doesn't like disperse and scatter into a bajillion pieces after Trump is no longer in the picture for one reason or another, then yeah, I do think that you're going to reach that trauma point.
And Tuan, the other part of that question from T is to you. If you could talk a little bit about what that Vietnamese word that you're talking about for trauma is, and in your experience, do the folks in Vietnam believe trauma from the war is something to unearth or to heal from, or is it something that you're urged to forget and bỏ qua?
So the word for post-traumatic stress disorder that I just learned through doing my research with the community in Quảng Trị is hậu chấn tâm lý. But I was talking to another friend actually, and Vietnamese people have been dealing with trauma for thousands of years, and we have our ways of dealing with it. Buddhism has been dealing with suffering and trauma for thousands of years too. So I think it's hard for me to say, specifically and in a clean cut and clear cut way that we aren't dealing with the traumas. We are dealing with our traumas inside of Vietnam and diasporically in many different ways. And we're juggling those different strategies, and they're specific to each family and each individual. Yeah, it's complicated and it's complex, and we're working through it.
Okay, so
what was the question again, Philip?
To follow up on that though,
Yeah.
like Koreans have a word for some of what we're talking about. Han, H-A-N. I've heard it from many Korean friends and scholars and artists and so on. They use it to talk about the enormous amounts of suffering that Korean people have endured, especially in the 20th century with colonization and war, division of the country, the ongoing division of Korea into North and South. So it's interesting that T had asked a question like, what is the Vietnamese word for trauma? Because it hasn't even, become a concept or a word that we, either the Vietnamese people in Vietnam or the Vietnamese diaspora, have foregrounded in the same ways that Koreans, at least in the Korean diaspora, have foregrounded. I've heard Han so many times to talk about everything from the LA riots, which you mentioned earlier, Tuan, to the Korean War and its aftermath. I'm just wondering from you whether you think that's an analogous issue. Have the Vietnamese people not been able to or not been willing to foreground their own experience in a way so that we even have a word that we all know to talk about this kind of history?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we are still trying to figure it out. When you mentioned earlier, Vit, that we're still very much a people that are split. It's kind of this trauma has been embedded in our mythologies, right? Like our story of Oka and Lạc Long Quang. It's a story of being split. It's a story of people being split, and possibly we're trying to deal with the traumas through the ways that we retell our stories, through mythology, through fiction, through nonfiction, through the kind of stories that we tell our children. It's deep and it's complicated. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm interested in the different strategies in which we go about looking at it and approaching it, but it's on the medical side, I have it's complicated.
I want to give you the
and
chance
because I work between two communities, right, the diaspora community and the communities in Vietnam, it's I see a lot of similarities in the ways that we kind of hide it and in the ways that it comes out in very passive aggressive ways.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to give you the chance to talk about a part of your work that we haven't talked about before, because I'm fascinated by this part of your work. I just watched one of your films, Because No One Living Will Listen, which is about a Vietnamese woman whose father is Moroccan, a Moroccan soldier from the French colonizing period. And her father dies in Vietnam, and he defects from the French side, and obviously fathers this woman. He dies when she is a baby, and then the film is about her writing a letter to her father, in which she also pours out her own sorrow. Chia buồn, I guess in Vietnamese would be the closest equivalent we might have to this Korean concept of Han. But she pours out her sorrow about her life and the difficulties that she's had being someone who's mixed race, descended from this soldier. And in some ways, she is a living reminder to Vietnamese people of one aspect of our history, which is French colonizing history, and implicitly sort of the racism that she's experienced as a mixed race person. And so, I mean, the reason why I find this project interesting, this particular film, Because No One Living Will Listen, is because it talks about a nuance of Vietnamese history that isn't dealt with very much, which is, again, that our history of colonization has created multiplicities of stories. And of course, as with many people, we tend to focus on certain aspects. So we've talked a lot about 1975 and the Vietnamese diaspora and French colonization and so on. But people like this woman in Because No One Living Will Listen, they fall between the cracks. And you have chosen to focus on her and other people as well. What brought you to her story, and how did you find her, and how did you create that film?
Yeah, in order to talk about Go Swoang, which is her Vietnamese name, Go Habiba is her Moroccan name, I have to talk about something prior to that. So I had been very interested in French tirailleurs. Tirailleur is a colonial soldier. The French had hundreds of thousands of colonial soldiers, all spread throughout their colonies. West Africa, North Africa, Madagascar, Indochine, in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And a lot of people don't know that the French actually brought a lot of tirailleurs from all over the world to Europe during World War I and World War II in defense of France, right? So when there was an uprising that began in Vietnam against French colonialism, against the French, they brought all their tirailleurs from West Africa and North Africa to Vietnam. And because that lasted about 10 years, a lot of, these tirailleurs, these colonial soldiers, had relationships with women and had children with women. So my first entry point into Go Swoang's story was actually a research project I did in Senegal, where there was a large migration of Vietnamese women and Métis children born out of, this relationship between, Vietnamese women and Senegalese soldiers. There was a large migration of Vietnamese women and children from Vietnam to Senegal in the 50s after the French were defeated in 1954. And that's a story that nobody talks about. So Go Swoang is kind of a continuation of my research, but on the other side, her father was a Moroccan soldier, also a tirailleur, who defected the French army and sided with the Vietnamese. Ho Chi Minh created the Vietnam Africa Farmstead. So he created this space where all these soldiers who defected from the French army could stay in Vietnam and live in Vietnam and work in Vietnam and have families and create families. So Go Swoang, Go Habiba is part of this moment in history. And these Moroccan soldiers were there up until 1972. So from 1954 until 1972, they were living on this farmstead. Go Swoang's father died when she was very young. So when repatriation of Moroccan soldiers and Moroccan families were happening in 1972, she could not prove that her father was Moroccan because he had died early in her life. So she's stuck in this very kind of liminal space where she's kind of not seen as Vietnamese, even though her father defected and sided with, the Vietnamese. And so she's this kind of specter that reminds us of a very different kind of perspective and a very different kind of history that we often forget, even within Vietnam. So that's the story of Go Swoang. I had learned of her story through a book called, sorry, the name kind of slips my mind, but there's also an Al Jazeera kind of interview with the Moroccan families. And this was early on in 2000, I can't remember, but early 2000s. And we decided to kind of find her and follow up with her and kind of work with her on this video project called Because No One Living Will Listen. So in the film, she writes a letter to her father.
It's a really
essentially.
beautiful film. So I hope we have a way to access that for folks, you know. Very moving as well. And I find these stories that don't fit the big templates so fascinating because, as you mentioned earlier, you know, so many people, as with the UXO story, the unexploded ordnance, you know, we focus on the 58,000 dead Americans and the 3 million dead Vietnamese, and then we forget that the war didn't end in 1975 and people are still getting killed by bombs and things, or unexploded mines and all that kind of stuff. And it's not a small thing, actually, even though it's not covered in mainstream stories. Philip,
Yeah.
you have a last question for Tina to walk us out.
Yes. And I mean, I think, man, it's been a very rich conversation. I'll just say that, you know, and I think it's a very timely conversation too. I mean, for Tina, we got a question from an audience member who wants to remain anonymous, but they mentioned if you have family members or who are Trump stans, have you been able to have fruitful conversations with them regarding misinformation or maybe even their political beliefs? And if you could give any advice on how to approach and navigate some of these difficult conversations that might trigger some of that trauma that we've been talking about.
What's worked for me with my relatives is never really tilting into the idea that like you are wrong for believing in this. But if they're presenting something that they've heard, I'll just be like, I don't believe that's true. Here is the evidence that I have in contrast with that. And you just have to remember that my relatives do truly believe that America is on the precipice of something horrible. And to tell them that they're wrong and that they're incorrect is like, I don't know, it just kind of hits at the center of who they are. And it seems to invalidate their trauma that they did genuinely go through in the past. So I think if you approach it with empathy and rather than say that like, you are wrong for believing this, but like someone is lying to you and here is what's happening, it's always resonated a lot better. And even if even if it doesn't reach the desired conclusion of like, man, I am wrong, I'm never voting for Donald Trump again. But if it's a gradual like, maybe I am wrong and I should start re-examining my assumptions, that can go a really long way. And I think it's a very worthwhile way to engage in disinfo, not like attacking it because it's wrong, but like leading them to question whether it is right.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you for that, Tina. Hopefully some of that advice sticks with our audience members who joined us here on Zoom tonight, and for everyone who's listening or watching this on demand later. An exciting announcement is that soon our production team on the back end for Accented is working on getting some of these conversations on Spotify and Apple Music, so you can listen to them on your commute as a podcast. Coming very, very soon. One last question I have for Viet, since he won't be joining us next month for our upcoming show on April 18th with guest host Lee Tran, that's going to feature Tammy, a multimedia painter, and KT Nguyen, who's doing a thriller novel about generational trauma. You have a show coming out very soon, Mr. Viet, on the 14th. You know, kind of just a segue out, like anything you're worried about it? Anything you're afraid of re-triggering or traumatizing, or your hopes for it, you know?
Okay, so it's called The Sympathizer TV series coming out on Max or HBO Max. And the debut is April 14th, Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, unavailable in Vietnam, but available in most regions of the world through various kinds of partners with HBO. And let me just say this, you know, if you've read the novel, then you'll know what's coming because it's 90% faithful to the novel. If you haven't read the novel, then don't worry, you never have to read the novel. You have the TV series. Plus One Day plays the captain or the narrator of the novel. He's there in almost every single shot of this 7-hour TV series. He's amazing. I really hope the TV series will make him and the other Vietnamese diasporic actors stars. We have Vietnamese diasporic actors coming from Canada, Australia, the United States. We even have some Vietnamese nationals who have committed their lives to this project, I think, given the political complications of this TV series. And of course, you know, everybody who's not Vietnamese will probably be focusing on the fact that we also have Sandra Oh playing Ms. Mori and Robert Downey Jr. playing at least 4 white men in the TV series. They're all really amazing. I've seen several of the episodes in rough cut format. And so I think it's gonna be something. I don't know what. I mean, I can't predict. I'm totally biased, you know, but so much of what we've been talking about through the entire 36 episodes of Accented, but including tonight, is about the necessity for Vietnamese people, whether they're in Vietnam or in the diaspora, to tell our own stories, to, you know, to seize our narratives, to take center stage, to get into all the nuances beyond the vast stereotypical swaths of other people's stories that we're so aware of. And so this Sympathizer TV series will be one contribution to that. It's not the only contribution, it's one contribution. But, you know, because it is HBO, because it is A24, because it is Max, because it is a $100 million production, which is a number I have a very hard time getting my mind around, it will reach a lot of people, for better and for worse. And what I hope from that is not that this tells the Vietnamese story, but it tells a Vietnamese story, and that it opens the door for so many other Vietnamese stories to come out. So that's my hope. I will be in San Jose. I will be in Orange County doing community screenings. I will be in DC at the Smithsonian. So just keep an eye out on the social media channels for these various screenings with me and possibly with other people from the production. And I will guarantee you at the very least that it will look awesome.
Congratulations.
I'm so stoked for this, man.
Thank you, Viet. And thank you to our guests for tonight, Tuan Andrew Nguyen and Tina Nguyen. It's something that, you know, I'm thinking about now is
All
like
Nguyens, by the way, all 4
all
of us
Nguyens.
are Nguyens.
Yeah, we have quads. We have 4 of a kind tonight. What a great way to start March. And I think yeah, I feel like it just feels like a moment where, you know, we're not maybe just framed as crazy rich Asians, but even like crazy radical refugees, especially when it comes to issues around history and memory and politics. And as we close out tonight's Accented show, I want to thank all of y'all for joining us for Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. Again, we'll be having a show next month on the 18th. Thank you so much to our guests, to our host, Viet Thanh Nguyen, to everyone on the back end. And to play us out, we don't have our in-house DJ Puzzle tonight, but we do have a short video about DVAN to play us off for tonight. So thank you all for coming and joining us joining the conversation with us.
Years ago, when I was studying DVAN or imagining about DVAN, we really thought, oh, we'll move Vietnamese American literature, Southeast Asian literature from the margin to the center. And today, I just feel like this is our space. My name is Isabelle Tuipelot, and I want to thank the San Francisco Public Library for co-sponsoring this event and for allowing us to hold this exciting program here at the spacious Correct Auditorium. In California, people of color are the majorities, and yet the 90% of the publishing industry is white. Out of 220 books, a bestseller for fiction by New York Times in 2020, only 20 books were published by people of color. So we felt like, oh, maybe we can knock at some doors and work for publishing industries to see if we can provide some opportunities for diasporic Vietnamese writers.
She calls every day at 8 a.m. My mother insists on interrupting my sleep. A Vietnamese man died this week, stabbed in the heart. My mother calls to tell me this. The word is used because I do not have another. Written again into this book, this need to wake. My mother calls to know that I'm alive. The man who died, I wonder if his mother is still awake.
I really began to write when I was 16 years old, because I think it's the moment I told myself, well, if you have to be here in this world. What do you want to do? And well, I wanted to write. It was really like a healing process for me. And when people read it, I think it's also a book that heals people, even though they are not Vietnamese, or even though they didn't have the same story.
Splash into murky depths, greeting a time zone between breath and drowning. Some legs fail to flap, some racers sink, and one boy gives up, swims back to Laos.
This year is a big year for us because we became a non-profit organization. This is huge, right? So for you being here is like we're doing the right thing. We empower, advocate, and foster narrative change for the community, creators, and the next generations through public events, including this Accented publications. You see some of our books that we published this year. We're changing the landscape of Vietnamese American literature. And we have workshops for our writers and also for community members to tell their stories.
My parents escaped Vietnam on a boat so their children could grow up in freedom. You'd think I could be a bit more grateful. But I am now older than my parents were when they made that incredible journey. But I fear that around them I will always be a child, and they a symbol to me, both sides of a chasm full of meaning and resentment. My story is like one of many hundreds of thousands of people's stories, but it's not exactly, right? And there's different ways to tell it, and so many angles and facets and experiences.
You know, our stories and poetry are important. They have the power to humanize us, and the ability to be heard can help us humanize ourselves to ourselves.
And now, fortunately, for those of us who are Vietnamese, we have an audience. We've built this audience. Now you're not lonely because, you know, we have built a community of readership.
We believe that empowering Vietnamese voices around the world, that the stories, imaginaries, and poetics of a thriving Vietnamese diaspora can unite our global community. Our mission is to celebrate and foster diasporic Vietnamese and Southeast Asian voices. Our complex and diverse stories must be championed and passed on to current and future generations because we are refugees, immigrants, survivors, and descendants, and our stories must be heard.
Right. Thank y'all for supporting DVAN and for joining us here on Accented Dialogues in Diaspora. Thank you again to Tuan and Tina for joining us, and hopefully we'll see y'all next time soon.
Thank
Good night,
you,
everyone.